Linguistic analysis requires a vocabulary for the syntactic roles being filled by individual morphemes and by phrases created from those morphemes. This is obviously essential for examining the morphemes and phrases themselves, but it is also essential for exploring nearly any other aspect of language and language use, because at any moment across any domain or application of linguistics, variation and differentiation might emerge as an interaction of morphemic or phrasal syntactic roles. In these lessons, we're using word classes as a catch-all term for the syntactic roles of morphemes and phrases headed by those morphemes. I will suggest ways that word classes might be directly relevant to linguistic research. Ultimately, though, it's most useful to think conceptually about word classes as part of the shared vocabulary of linguists, and to use these learning materials within this lesson as a foundation for identifying the syntactic roles played by morphemes and phrases in language data. With that perspective in mind, I'll now illustrate approaches to linguistic study that rely on knowledge of word classes. To do this, I'll focus on one of the most dramatic recent changes in English in the sense of its being socially salient, incredibly rapid, and globally widespread: the innovation in the use of the word like. I'll exemplify different forms of like with text from tweets. Where possible, I'll also suggest derivational structures for the relevant text to connect our broader work in syntax to the word classes that like belongs to. Maybe the least interesting word class assignment of like is that it can function as a verb, as it does in this tweet. Of course, verbal like isn't uninteresting if you're on the giving or receiving end of liking or disliking. It's just a pretty conservative variant. Also, incidentally, for me growing up, verbal like was subject to reduplication because you could clarify, do you like them or do you like them? So verbal like is all right, just a conservative variant. English verbs can generally undergo nominalization, so it's also not surprising that like exists as a noun. You can especially recognize nominal like when it occurs with a determiner, as in this tweet. And of course, the plural morpheme that usually occurs in the noun phrase, the likes of, also gives it away as a noun. Perhaps a little more interesting, social media has also given us a nominal like, as in giving someone a like, and similar constructions illustrated here. I say this is interesting because this nominal like must have arisen as a separate derivation from the more traditional nominal like that appears in the phrase, the likes of. The social media version of like, of course, is a nominalization of the verb like as it's used as a way to rate content. That gives it a different origin from the more traditional variant. Evidence of this difference shows up if you try to quantify nominal like. You can say, I've never seen the likes of this team before, but you cannot say I've never seen two likes of this team before. So you can't change the quantification with a numeral. But by contrast with the social media version of nominal like, you obviously can say I've never seen two likes on their video before. So because it has a different derivation, that social media version of nominal like has a different set of constraints operating on it, and we can quantify it as we do with other count nouns. Like functions as a preposition, as it does in this tweet. Again, this is a non-innovative use. The best evidence that it's functioning as a preposition is that the phrase takes a noun phrase as a complement, which is exactly the phrase structure we'd expect for an adpositional phrase. Like can function as a conjunction, as it does here. In this case, like embeds a subordinate clause within a main clause. Like also exists as a suffix, which can attach to nouns. Suffix like turns the new word that it attaches to into an adjective and adds a meaning of having qualities similar to. That's exemplified in this tweet. Now we move into more innovative like spaces. A highly socially salient innovation of like is its use to introduce a quotation. Quotative like has rapidly displaced other quotatives in English, which include say, as in I say exactly dude, go, as in I go exactly dude, all, as in I'm all exactly dude, among other quotatives. Importantly, quotative like seems to carry different information from other quotatives. Pragmatically, quotative like introduces the disposition and general propositional content conveyed by the quote, but does not ever entail an exact quotation. Indeed, as the tweet illustrated, quotative like can be used validly to report thoughts which were never actually uttered. This unique function of quotative like is especially obvious if you compare it with the conservative say, which does seem to imply or even require a higher standard of fidelity to the actual words that were actually uttered. As such, quotative like fills a lexical gap in English. Quotative like at least used to carry a strong association with feminine speech. Jennifer Daly O'Kane studied quotative like in a corpus of informal U.S. English. She found that young people used quotative like more than older people, which is not terribly surprising, but also found that males in the corpus used quotative like more than females, which, for me at least in my generation, does seem surprising. Indeed, Daly O'Kane found that in matched guise tests, raters perceived that females used quotative like more than males, even though the opposite was actually true in the objective data that was present in her corpus. So this revealed important sociolinguistic work that was happening with quotative like usage. Like functions as an approximative adverb, as in this tweet. Approximer like frequently modifies numerals and downgrades the commitment to exactness of the number. Alexandra Darcy found that approximer like was rapidly replacing other English approximers, such as about, around, and approximately, in a corpus of Toronto English. For the youngest Torontonians, like was the most commonly used approximer, and it had emerged rapidly from practically never being used as an approximer during the first third of the 20th century to become the dominant form at the end of the 20th century. Muffy-Siegel also notes a seemingly related approximative function in which like can weaken strong determiners such as every in this tweet. Completing the process of delexicalization, like functions as a discourse marker. As a discourse marker, like sort of sits outside of the grammar and can be inserted for information packaging purposes or to do work to manage floor. Some of these uses may do work as what Daly O'Kane calls a focuser, this sort of function of focusing the discourse on the statements that will follow immediately after like might be illustrated in this use. But more generally, discourse marker like can be used to signal, for instance, that a speaker has not finished their turn. So like if I say like there are like some examples of like discourse markers, each of those instances of like helps me to hold onto the floor by letting my interlocutors know I'm still talking and it's not their turn yet. And so I manage part of the conversation and the floor we're negotiating through my use of discourse marker like. The point of this example is not the details of the innovations in like. The point is that the example of like shows a case of rapid, radical change in Englishes worldwide. In this case, we can only make sense of the change if we have labels of word classes to categorize all the different syntactic roles that morphemes of like are playing. Word classes give us a vocabulary for morphosyntactic elements, and with that vocabulary, we can reveal a tremendous amount of exciting linguistic innovation.